In this video, we're going to talk about logical fallacies. And logical fallacies is actually something you may have even seen in a non-math class. But we can actually use mathematics to analyze the strength of an argument and how logical something flows. So logic itself is the study of arguments. And an argument uses a set of premises or presumptions, which we're going to call claims, and those support a conclusion. So this kind of basic breakdown is what we need to kind of take a very mathematical approach to an argument. We want to identify what our premise is and our conclusion. So let's go ahead and look at some arguments. So we're going to identify whether or not we have a premise looking at us or a conclusion, and it's mixed up. So the 3 bullet points, it could be a premise, it could be a conclusion, and that's what we want to determine. So everyone in San Francisco is a liberal. Michael Savage lives in San Francisco. Michael Savage is a liberal. And if you kind of read this step by step, it almost seems like this first one would be a premise. We're making some sort of presumption, and that is that everyone who's in San Francisco is a liberal. Now, the second piece here, Michael Savage lives in San Francisco, really isn't a conclusion. It's more like a piece of information. So that would qualify as a premise as well. Which leaves that when you say Michael Savage must be a liberal simply because he lives in San Francisco, that would be a conclusion. So this one is set up as an argument would be set up. Everyone in San Francisco is a liberal. Michael Savage happens to live there. Therefore, he must be a liberal too. Okay, so second argument. All US presidents have been men. So that seems like a factual statement. Therefore, that makes a good premise. JFK was a man. That's true. But now let's look at this last statement before we decide if that's a premise or not. JFK was also a US president. So the question is, based on assuming this very first statement is a premise that all US presidents have been men, it would make more sense then to say that this last statement here is a premise. So we're classifying JFK as being a US president. And since all US presidents have been men, we can therefore conclude that JFK was a man. So do you see how we kind of structure that? You typically want to look for words where it has like everyone, all, some. Those kind of words are typically part of our premise, and we use those to apply to other pieces of information that we're gathering and including in our argument. Now, a fallacy, which is what we're interested in, is a bad argument. So the conclusion not being well supported by the facts or the premises. Now, really important that we understand that not every premise is in fact true. And therefore, that's where you can start poking holes in arguments. But if we assume each piece is true, does the conclusion follow? That's what we're after. Even if there's bad facts and premises, we want to know if the conclusion really does follow from that. So before we kind of get into that, we want to talk about some common fallacies, bad arguments that people make. And we're going to kind of go through these quickly. And if you need to pause the video and read through them slowly, that's fine. But we're going to look at them quickly and then kind of apply some examples and figure out which one makes sense. Okay, so first, false cause, and also called post hoc, by the way. So they both work, false cause or post hoc. That's saying that because something came before something else, so some event A came before B, therefore A caused B. Okay, so just using the simple fact that an event happened before another event, that meant it caused it. Appeal to ignorance. So there's no proof that something is true, therefore it's false. That's the idea that because we don't have the knowledge there, we can't therefore say it's true. It must be false. False dilemma. A and B are the only options. So we're limiting ourselves to two options. A is false, therefore B must be true. So it's this idea that you kind of restrict the argument to only having two options. And that's not always the case. There's not always just a two option scenario. So it's this kind of restricting that argument to have two options. And therefore you're saying, well, since this one's not true, the other one must be. Appeal to authority is using an expert. So some expert says it's true, therefore you must be true. Okay. Personal attack, which is also called ad hominem. This is when you have a problem with a group. Okay. And therefore, because the group says it's true, it must not be true because you just don't like them. And this happens a lot, especially with politics, right? People on different sides of the aisle will often look at the opposite side. And if they say it's true, they automatically assume it's a lie just because they don't agree with their political opinion. And they are not really looking at the information. And be careful. Think of it as your own group of people. So whatever political affiliation you identify with, if you do, if your group looks at somebody and assumes that what they say is wrong, that's not good. That's not a good argument. So that makes a bad argument. Straw man. Now this one's a common one. I have an argument concerning a distorted version of P. Therefore, I hope you are fooled enough into concluding that I have a real version of P. So it's taking some event and actually distorting what really happened and then arguing about it. So it's kind of altering what you're looking at. That's the straw man. And the straw man itself is not the real thing that you should be looking at. So let's kind of look at these in context. Some of these could have more than one answer. If I feel like one does, I'll try to say it, but I may not. And if I don't feel like that means that it couldn't be argued that more than one answer could be working for it. I'm just going to look for the biggest version. So vote against healthcare bill because lying Laura supports it. Okay, so immediately they're pointing to not agreeing with somebody whom they're calling lying Laura, and that would be a personal attack or ad hominem. So that is the fallacy. Just because she says it is, it shouldn't happen. That's a bad way of looking at it. No one has proven it isn't Bigfoot in the photo, so it must be Bigfoot. So that's again saying that because we don't have more information and we're going to assume it's false. That is appeal to ignorance. And actually, I'm just going to say this. I should have said it earlier. Try answering these yourself. Like pause the video, go ahead and go through each part and see which one you think works. And then compare it to what I say and kind of see why I said what I think it is. Okay. But in this one, because they're saying it isn't Bigfoot, that you can't prove it is, therefore it can't be Bigfoot, is a bad argument. It's a bad argument. That's not good enough. So just because you can't prove it's Bigfoot doesn't mean it isn't. Oprah Winfrey says Weight Watchers works, so it must be effective. Okay, this is when we are appealing to authority. We're assuming that somehow Oprah Winfrey is the supreme authority on weight loss, and therefore what she says must work. All right, bad argument. Either those lights in the sky were an airplane or aliens. So we're limiting ourselves to only two options. There are no airplanes scheduled for tonight, so it must be aliens. That's that false dilemma. Only giving two options to start, and that's a problem. Senator Corey, I'm assuming that's how it's pronounced, forgive me if I said it wrong, has proposed reducing military funding by 10%. Apparently, she wants to leave us defenseless against attacks by terrorists. So there's a couple that we could use here, all right? But the problem here is, I think there is an argument to be said that it could be personal attack, but we haven't really seen why Senator Curry is a problem. So then I'm going to kind of look a little broader. So it might be personal attack, But because I don't, from the sentence, I don't see necessarily what they have a problem with Senator Corey, where that first one, lying Laura, right? Like, it's this idea that they believe that everything they say is a lie. But I would kind of feel like they might be doing a straw man argument. All right. And the reason is, we're assuming that reducing this funding is going to leave us open to attacks by terrorists. We don't really know where the funding is going to come from. So, I mean, where it's going to be reduced. So to assume that that's going to have a direct effect on what's happening on the terrorist front is a bad assumption. So I think we're looking at a straw man argument here. Let me just go back up. So a distorted version of what this means. And therefore, I'm hoping to fool you into concluding that an argument concerning the real version is what we should conclude. So make an argument based on the distorted view of someone's beliefs. And in this case, the belief that reducing funding is going to immediately leave us defenseless to terrorists is the problem. That's the distorted view of having reduced funding. And that could be the case with any reduced funding, by the way, any argument like that. Today I wore a red shirt and my team won. I will wear a red shirt every time they play to make sure they keep winning. So this is that one where, because an event happened, we assume that caused the second event. All right, bad argument. Therefore, this would be a false cause. We're assuming that the cause of your team winning incorrectly. All right. The Association for Family Values has endorsed Ms. Burke, so you should vote for her. So again, this is kind of assuming that the Association of Family Values is an authority and what they say goes, like kind of like the Oprah Winfrey one. That's a problem. This is another appeal to authority. Assuming that just because they say, you should go with it. Coyotes must be extinct since I haven't seen any for 5 years. Lack of information. That's an appeal to ignorance. Just because you haven't seen them doesn't mean they're not around. If you don't drink Coke, you don't drink Coke, so you must not consume caffeinated drinks. All right. There's actually a couple I think that can apply to this. One would be appeal to ignorance, only because you're saying that because you haven't seen it, it must not exist. So I think appeal to ignorance could work for this. But the other one is, you could possibly argue that this is false dilemma, meaning that there's only two options. Like, you're limiting the options of how caffeine gets consumed. So you could also possibly say this is a false dilemma. We're limiting ourselves to saying that Coke is the only way to get caffeine. And since somebody's not drinking Coke, they must not get caffeine. That's like a limiting of what you're allowing yourself to look at. So I think both could work. People should avoid seeing the movie Star Wars because Jan was diagnosed with strep throat the next day after she saw it, and I got the flu a few days after seeing that same movie. So again, it's the idea that because they went and saw something and certain things happened, that meant it caused it. That's false cause. The failing New York Times endorsed Mr. Chang, but he is a moron who doesn't know what he's doing. Don't vote for him. So again, failing New York Times. So that's implying already that there's an issue with this particular newspaper, in assuming that that newspaper couldn't possibly make a good recommendation. That's a personal attack. So when it's attacking somebody specifically, where we kind of get these kind of slanderous words, that's when we'll go ahead and assume that it's a personal attack. Otherwise, we'll look a little bit bigger, like how we did on the straw man one, and kind of figure out if maybe we're looking at a distorted view. Now, just real quick, when you are looking at media information, this is important. And I mean this sincerely, and I mean this for anybody with any political opinion. I don't care what your actual affiliation is. This is how you want to kind of look at evaluating that information. So you want to consider the source. And here, I'm going to actually zoom in a little bit and lower my screen so I don't mess this up too bad. Consider the source. I should have given more room. Is the source of information clear? Does it have credibility? That matters. The second thing, you want to check the date. I actually see this a lot. People sending out very dated information. Checking the date is like one of the first things you want to do after you check to see what the source is. You want to validate accuracy. Most people do this. I do this, I should say, when I'm not sure, I'm not familiar with the source. I start trying to validate the accuracy. I try to look to see what other people have said. Can you find this information somewhere else? Is there anything else that supports what they're saying? So I like to validate accuracy when I just don't know information about who the source is. You definitely want to watch for hidden agendas. I think it's very safe to say that there are certain news channels that slant a certain way, and therefore it's possible there's an agenda. It really is. I think that most people can accept that. So certain TV hosts might slant very liberal or very conservative, and therefore they'll have an agenda with how they present the information. You do need to be careful. Even if you do have a strong political affiliation, you should be watching, especially with somebody you don't know information about. Pay attention for hidden agendas. That's what we're really interested in. Are they being objective or are they manipulating? And don't miss the big picture. Sometimes people get really fixated on details, and it's not always really the right thing to be looking at. Sometimes you have to look a lot bigger. So you want to kind of look at the big picture sometimes, step back. Are we getting too much into details that it's not really understanding what the big idea is? Those are kind of things you can use to help yourself as you evaluate media information. And in the next section, we'll kind of take this and go further and start looking at how we can apply mathematics to arguments.